contracting COVID-19 while on business premises and how that could translate into lawsuits that might cripple, perhaps fatally, a business's ability to recover from the devastating economic impact of the virus. So this is a concern that we wanted to talk about here in this committee and see if this is an issue that we want to take up at the chamber level. So if Michael and Meredith, you want to go ahead and take it away, please.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us today to talk about COVID liability business shields. It's the CFO Jimmy Petronis's top issue this legislative session. I'm Meredith Stanfield. I am the CFO's Legislative and Cabinet Affairs Director. And what we know is that this pandemic is not just a health crisis with economic benefit or economic impacts. These two are inextricably linked. And CFO Petronis, a business owner himself, always wants to lean in with our businesses. And so especially during the onset of the pandemic, when we weren't sure how widespread the effects would be, we met with as many businesses across as many sectors as we could on Zoom, on Teams, on this proprietary platform that looked like a ballroom, you name it, we were on there talking to Florida businesses to get their direct feedback. How were these businesses being affected, and what could we do? What could the CFO do as a leader in the state? So what we learned was this: Florida's businesses, our economic engines, were resilient. Everyone was pivoting and adapting. Our businesses were focused on keeping themselves safe, following whatever guidelines were available, sometimes conflicting, and trying to translate those and adapt their business practices to keep their customers and employees safe. Many of our businesses were afraid that even doing all of these things, following the guidance, buying the PPE, adhering to new safety protocols, enforced limitations on occupancy, weren't going to be enough to keep them safe from undue lawsuits. It quickly became clear that this fear was going to stop some businesses from even reopening. And of course, CFO took action. As a business owner, someone who has made payroll, who has hourly employees, we can count on him to lean in with businesses. And so very early on, he called for COVID liability shield protections to be put in place as soon as practicable by the legislature. And I have good news. Newly minted Speaker Chris Sprowls and President Wilton Simpson are both on the record saying, we all agree, this is a problem and we need to address it. Businesses who are good actors, doing the right things for their customers and employees, they shouldn't be blindsided by a frivolous lawsuit. And if someone's doing the wrong thing, they are still held accountable. We know that these bills are likely going to run through special committees set up by both chambers to address pandemic response. We've heard directly from the chairs of both of those committees, Chair Tom Leek in the House and Chair Danny Burgess in the Senate. Chair Britter was also with us when we unveiled this last week, but they have both said there will be a bill and we're going to get it passed this session. Just yesterday, we were with Senate President Pro Tem Aaron Bean in Jacksonville and Senator Jeff Brandes in Tampa. He is going to be the chair who runs this legislation in the Senate, and they're both there in support of passing these important protections for our businesses. So all signs point to successful passage this session, if not sooner. And we're looking for three important things: a higher negligence standard, a higher culpability standard, and a shorter period for filing. And so Michael Dobson, our special counsel and policy director, is going to explain a little more what that means. I'm sure we're going to see different bills in both chambers, knowing how they feel, but the good news is that we continue to hear from both chambers, this is important and we want to see some passage. Last week, the governor also came out in support for this. He'd made previous statements in support, and we're doing our best to keep that pot boiling, to keep the exigent circumstances there, to make sure that the legislature does the right thing by our businesses. So Michael Dobson, if you would, thank you guys.
Hey, good morning, all. My name is Michael Dobson, and as Meredith said, I'm the policy director and legal advisor for the CFO. And I made some visual aids, prepared some visual aids, but I'm seeing the glare is not very friendly on them. So I'm going to walk y'all through the mechanics of the liability shield and like what the CFO is looking for. But before doing that, I kind of want to talk for just a couple of minutes about the why. And so the why is that, you know, there's no playbook for how to run a business during a pandemic. And certainly we've experienced up here in Tallahassee, there's no playbook for, you know, for being a cabinet official or trying to maintain continuity of government stuff during a pandemic. And so there's a ton of uncertainty. And what the CFO is concerned about is he does not want trial lawyers who might go for some more kind of drive-by tactics, similar to the ADA lawsuits that became a thing in the 90s and the early 2000s with the wheelchair ramps, right? Like small business gets a demand letter, we chose a plaintiff, and you can hire an attorney and we can go to court, or you can write us a check for a few grand and we'll go away. And so really what we're worried about is the nuisance value kinds of lawsuits. I think that's probably the biggest threat to come out of this. And something else that I'm worried about, I know we have a school board member joining us today, is governments also face a lot of liability, and that's the taxpayers. Like there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? If your school board gets sued or the state gets sued, taxpayers are ultimately going to pay, and governments have some unique challenges in the pandemic as well. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Obviously, this is a chamber call, but that is a long way of saying the CFO is really looking for a simple solution that does not pick winners and losers among private sector. As y'all probably are aware, the government does not have a very good track record of picking winners and losers. It's not something we do well, and so it's not something that the CFO is interested in doing either. So like Meredith said, this is a very simple across the board, because there's no such thing, I don't think the CFO believes, as just one essential business, right? Like if you've got a family and you've got a mortgage, you've got kids, your business is essential and you need to be open. You need to have the confidence that you can be open without having to deal with frivolous lawsuits. So with that, let's just talk a little bit, because I don't think the liability shield makes a ton of sense unless you appreciate where we're at right now under kind of the default. So right now, the statute of limitations for an action found on negligence is 4 years, all right? And so it's really important to contract that down, because we don't want somebody, the specter of COVID liability hanging over businesses for the next 4 years or 5 years, however long it takes to get past this virus. So leg number one in the stool is to shorten that statute of limitations to a 1 year period, okay? By going to a 1 year period, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is a point that we know we can get past. And if people really did have something terrible happen to them, they can bring a suit in a year. It's not a crazy standard. And so the next piece of it is this culpability standard. Oh, thanks, Meredith. Can y'all see that at all? No, you still can't. That glare is terrible.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll try and break this down real easy. So generally the default is a negligence standard. And this is like on a scale of like easier to bring, harder to bring, right? So the default is negligence. And so negligence is basically, did you act reasonably? And businesses have a duty to warn people of known dangers. One of the things the shield does is it increases the standard from negligence, which is basically a reasonable standard, to gross negligence, which is considered reckless disregard for human life. All right, so you're making your employees come in when you know they're sick and they're dealing with customers and they're hacking on people, and your customers are people who are, you know, more likely to be vulnerable to something. Yeah, you should probably have to deal with some liability issues. But if you are trying to adhere to CDC guidelines, which I should have mentioned, that is the overarching principle of the shield, is you're entitled to shield if you make a reasonable effort to adhere to government guidelines. What are those government guidelines? You can choose which ones are applicable to you, right? So if you like CDC, go with CDC. If you like OSHA, go with OSHA. If you like what Seminole County Health Department is doing, stick with them. We're trying to make it so compliance is an easy bar for people to get to as long as they are following whatever the science is, okay? And one other thing I'm going to preface this with is the CFO is not a member of the legislature, right? So he's got a wish list. The wish list is not necessarily what ends up in law because he doesn't actually write or vote on the laws. So anyway, what we're looking at doing is going to a heightened standard of gross negligence, get away from the reasonable standard, and that is largely due to the uncertainty, right? I don't know what's reasonable right now in the pandemic. Am I quarantining for 14 days? Am I quarantining for 5 days? Are my people 6 feet apart? Is maybe 8 feet apart? What if I measured wrong and my little things on the floor are only 5 feet apart? Can somebody sue me then? And so trying to get to a heightened gross negligence standard is really important to make sure that the cases that are moving forward are legit, because we just don't know what reasonable is, right? We need something a little higher up. And the other thing I would share with y'all, and this is something that I'm maybe more concerned about than the reasonable or negligence standard, is a theory called negligence per se. And negligence per se exists where there is a statute or law that gets violated, and then someone gets hurt as a result of that. And under a negligence per se theory, it's strict liability. Because you violated the law, you are liable. You don't have to worry about things like causation and some of the other hoops that the child bar has to jump through. And so when you've got a governor and others who are putting out these standards for occupancy, and you've got CDC standards out there for social distancing and wearing masks, I'm concerned that an artful trial lawyer could hold a business to a negligence per se standard, which is easier to get at than even negligence is, okay? So that's another reason why this heightened gross negligence standard is important. And then let's talk about evidence for a minute. Evidence is the third prong of what we're talking about here. And evidence, don't worry about it. I don't just, the lighting is not good. There are varying evidentiary standards in civil claims, right? And so the default standard is what's known as preponderance of the evidence. Is it more likely true than not? Like 50% plus 1. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have beyond reasonable doubt, right? And that's what you see on Law and Order. That's what the prosecutors got to prove. They want to lock you up and take away your property and stuff like that, okay? So we're not going all the way over there. But the recommendation is clear and convincing evidence, okay? That's a higher standard than preponderance. And clear and convincing basically means, are you certain that what is being asserted is true and correct, okay? So we're going for certainty. And once again, that's because there's so much uncertainty. We want to be really clear with any case law that develops that, we are certain this person acted in a way that was, culpable under the shield. So once again, if you adhere to government guidelines, whatever those are, you make a reasonable effort, you'll be protected with heightened culpability, a heightened evidentiary standard, and then that statute of limitations you'll have to deal with is 1 year instead of 4 years. So that's kind of the quick and dirty on the liability shield.
Do y'all have any questions that we could answer?
All right. Anybody have any questions for Michael and Meredith?
Sure. Thank you both for being here this morning. I just had a question. Where do you envision the bar being set for negligence on this? You mentioned it before, because the issue of coronavirus and how people are handling it has been so kind of across the board in terms of where you live. Do you envision the bar for negligence being set by the legislature so that it's whatever you choose, kind of like you said? Or is it something more standardized, like everybody goes with the CDC standards, or something else? Like how do you envision that playing out?
Definitely set by the legislature.
Okay.
And the standard it's a two-step thing, right? If you are adhering to applicable government guidelines, ones that apply to you and where you're located,
But
You would
so
be entitled to a heightened negligence standard, which is gross negligence, which amounts to reckless disregard for human life. Okay. So,
I'm sorry. I want to be clear about it. So which standards are chosen, right? So you said where you live, right? So if you live in Seminole County, do you just get to choose what Seminole County says, or do you have to apply the CDC standards to where you live? And maybe that's part of where the discussion is going to lie with the legislature. But.
I was about to say, Chris, I think you hit a target right there.
Okay.
You know, I think that is going to be something that's defined by the legislature, and I think the House and Senate may feel differently about that. So I think we're going to hear a lot about that aspect of this bill as it moves through the process.
Thank you. And do you envision that's, Meredith, do you envision that's something that they will that they will feel obligated to kind of come to a decision on and not leave it as nebulous as it could potentially be?
You know, I would imagine that the Senate would like it to be more nebulous, and the House might want to define those terms a little stronger, and, you know, for any number of reasons. But sure. If you'll remember, we were seeing guidance early on that was sometimes conflicting from different government entities. Yeah. And that's why it's so important. You know, we're not weighing in on what exactly it should be or whose guidance is best or trumps whose, because we heard that from businesses repeatedly. I look at one standard and it says this, I look at another standard and it says that. I'm trying to reconcile these two so that I can modify my business practices. What am I to do? And so that was an important aspect of why the CFO wanted to see these protections move forward. Your businesses are doing the best they can with the information they can, and it changed throughout the pandemic. It continues to change. And so it's so important that we give businesses some flexibility in that space. You're dead on that this is going to be a big topic of conversation in this bill, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be fascinated to watch. Thank you both.
Yeah.
It's like ping pong.
Yeah.
I have kind of that same thing. I think, Chris, this is what we're saying. So we're in Volusia County because Seminole won't annex us yet, but we're in Volusia, which does not have a mask mandate. It's a recommendation. I'm in DeBarry. We have a recommendation, but Orange City and DeLand has a mandate. So, you know, we're hearing confusion from businesses on that. DeBarry, no. We strongly recommend, but there's no mandate to wear a mask if you're walking, you know, to your seat or something.
And what a terrible position to put businesses in the place of arbitering what is or is not the appropriate guidance set forth by whatever government entity. So that's just rocking a hard place, guys.
There was some discussion earlier on about the federal government trying to implement something similar to this, and then as I understand, there are some other states that have already rolled out or about to roll out. Are we looking at this at a similar model? Or are we coming up with something unique on our own?
Florida's always special, right? Even if there is even if the federal government passes something, we need a Florida-specific protection. And Michael, your team has looked into extensively all of the iterations. Some of them passed in law, some of them in executive orders. You know, there are a lot of ways to skin that cat, to your point, Dan. And
yeah, so Cassie and Rachel, a couple folks on my team are sitting here just off camera, and we've been looking nationwide at what the trends are. And this pattern of heightened evidentiary, heightened statute of limitations, or shorter statute of limitations, and heightened culpability standard, that pattern is basically repeating itself. Some folks do an absolute total immunity. I don't think we could get there in Florida because of some constitutional things that exist in the Florida Constitution. But this is, I would say, the most common or most widely adopted framework for a liability shield.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, guys, I've got a question. Thanks a lot for your presentation and for the work you guys have put into this. I've seen a few versions of language circulated around, particularly one coming out of Senator Brandis's office, that I noticed has a both a severability clause and some language at the end that would apply it retroactively to earlier in the year. Do you guys expect that that would hold up in court?
I think retroactive is tough. We have a very different Supreme Court in 2020 in the state of Florida than we did even just a couple of years ago. So it's really hard to say how this new court is going to rule on that. But in general, if you look at the case law that exists, retroactivity is difficult. And a severability clause in anything that moves forward, I think, is a really good idea.
Okay. Yeah, us too. Thanks.
I think we say that to say this is certainly an exigent situation.
Yeah.
And if you were going to apply retroactively to the beginning of the governor's emergency order would likely be the most appropriate given the current situation.
Thank you.
For sure. Thanks, Zach.
All right. Any other questions from the group?
And I do have a quick one. I know this entire discussion is circled around businesses, but as you alluded to earlier, it's government entities can be sued as well. And as you know, dealing with the school system and the college system, a lot of people sometimes think that's low-hanging fruit for lawsuits. Will the government entities be wrapped into whatever bill you envision seeing coming out?
So it just so happens that the CFO is also the state's insurer for liability. So we insure all the agencies and the universities, so he gets it. Even with sovereign immunity capping your suits at $250,000 a pop, the taxpayers are still facing basically unlimited liability here. And it's not a zero-sum game, you know, like we can't print money. We've got to get it from y'all. So that's a very important piece of this. And yeah, it's certainly top of mind for the CFO as the state's underwriter.
In addition to not-for-profits who are frequently targeted in these kinds of lawsuits. So we're hearing from not-for-profits at the same rate that they need some protection too.
And you're absolutely right too about government being the low-hanging fruit. I mean, we moved 2,000 people to telework just here at the department. Now, if we start bringing them back, and you know, if they don't want to come back, if I tell a 65-year-old they have to come back to work, am I looking at age discrimination lawsuit? Am I looking at ADA lawsuit? You know, I mean, these are real problems that, if not dealt with now, I think government could be dealing with and taxpayers could be dealing with for a long time into the future.
Great question.
Welcome to my world. We see that every day.
Yeah.
You know, really, it is a complex issue because you're dealing with federal law like ADA issues and state laws, and even within the state of Florida, you can see the differences of how school districts have treated this based on when we opened, what options that we're offering our students. And as you know, Seminole's very conservative and still red, but other districts aren't, and we just don't want to be painted with the same paintbrush as perhaps some other districts.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions from the group for Michael and Meredith?
All right.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have one more. It's too good of an issue not to ask another question.
Fair.
So do you envision, like, if you had to predict right now going into this session, do you envision something getting done?
Yes. Everyone we talk to says so. When you have the Senate President pro tem, when you have the chairs of all of the committees, the Speaker, the Governor, the CFO, all kind of marching the same message, I think something will absolutely happen this session. It's just a matter of the details.
Yeah.
Where will it fit in? But we're really excited about this, and we need you guys. And here's why. You know, the CFO can stand up and talk, but your member organizations, you represent businesses directly, and helping us keep that sense of urgency, share what you are experiencing directly is incredibly meaningful as we march our message throughout session. So I do think something will happen, and we would absolutely love your support.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, excellent questions. Any more questions from the group for Michael and Meredith? Very nice presentation, guys. We really appreciate it. Great job. It's very informative, and I would really appreciate you taking the time out there and to meet with us this morning.
Thank you all so much. Oh, sorry.
On behalf of CFO Jimmy Vitronis, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.